This podcast is a chance for me to sit down with so many great people that I've met over the years and get to know them better. I get to ask them a lot of questions about what they do, both for work, what they do personally, and maybe learn a few life lessons along the way. It's a really fun sort of coffee conversation, and I'm hoping you'll grab a cup of coffee and join me. I am here with my longtime friend, Jeff Eisenberg. He and I, man, we go way back. Go back to like 2008, maybe? I don't know. We're going to talk about that a bit more. But he currently owns a company called Media Intercept. The short of it is he'll share a little bit more, but they connect publishers and advertisers. They're a really efficient sort of revenue opportunity that connects them both. He's had that company now for, I want to say, a year or two. But we have spent so much time over the years talking about how sales has changed that I just thought, like, this would be a good idea. Why don't the two of us just get on and share some of these conversations with the rest of you? We've both been in sales for a long time. It's changed a lot. We've always had these really interesting conversations. So this is a chance for us to have them now. So welcome, Jeff. Good to have you, buddy.
Sean. Appreciate it. Great to be here.
Yes, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Like I said, we go back. Do we go back to like 2008? Is that right?
I think 2010.
Oh, 2010. Okay.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I started working with you 2010, so we might have met in person like end of 2009.
Right. So he and I worked with a company called Deca, which was like one of those first sort of generation content companies that created their own original content. I actually worked for a television company called Mania TV before that, but we both had a lot of success there. What was your big success? I think mine was Ragu's Mom's the Word for Dinner. I feel like that was my big one.
Yeah, there were a bunch. I think the biggest I had was Laughing Cow, Borson.
Oh, yeah. I remember that one.
Yeah,
That's so funny, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Deck is still around, right?
Yeah, I think they're called now Kin Community, right?
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah, Michael's still around. He's doing his thing. So it's really funny. Yeah. Anyway, what do you think about what comes to mind for you when you think about sales and how it's changed since you and I started in 2010? What are like the first things that pop in your head?
I mean, in 2010, I would even go back further, really, but the first thing is how sort of different the mediums are in terms of like outreach, right?
Yeah.
Like there was a point in time where like you would dial for dollars. You'd actually pick up the phone and call people. Or, I started in local radio. I would set an appointment and then I would just look for businesses in the area that I thought were relevant. I'd walk in their door.
Right. I did the same.
I would say, I think we were talking about it. I was like, if you like called somebody now, like unsolicited, I feel like they'd like call the police or something.
Yeah, I know they'd get upset. I do too. I actually think it would be like a hostile reaction. Like, what are you doing? Yeah.
Right. But you can go even further, right? Like I was talking to my business partner and I think she said the same thing you said, which is she used to send handwritten like letters to people.
Yeah.
But I mean, imagine a world where you're selling without the internet. I mean, that obviously existed. It seems like crazy to talk about that, in the age of, where everything is impersonal email or even, over Slack or whatever. But, think of a time before fax machines or anything where it's just like you would walk into places and find people and sell them. So right. I think, we'll sort of talk about like how sales is the same, but I think the biggest difference is how you actually find people, find prospects, and ultimately connect with them, right?
Right. I mean, that's the thing, right? At the end, it's all about connections. I probably say that the internet probably just made it easier to have a lot more players than it was before, right? So a lot more noise, but there was noise before too. So whether you were fighting it out with 100 partners or 10 partners, you were still fighting it out with partners. But I think that's one of the big changes too. But yeah, that's always been my struggle, which is, we're all kind of over-reliant on the only form of communication that seems to work, which is email. So it makes it challenging for sure. And I'm always constantly thinking about ways to sort of move beyond that. I mean, even this is an example, right? I do this podcast because it's like a way to maybe create some content to sort of share with people and stand out a little bit. But that's my biggest challenge. What do you think, like, we're talking about the internet and technology. And so you like give me examples where you feel like that's helped the process for you versus or do you think that it hurts the process? Like, what do you think
I,
about it overall?
it's interesting. And one thing we'll probably end up talking about is, when you talk about sales is empathy and things like that, like understanding, the mentality of the person across the table from you. But like, I'd be curious to ask a buyer if there are any that exist that have been like, buying for 40 years, like what they think
Oh,
about, it's
yeah.
like, did you prefer when people would call you like, or just show up, wherever, or do you like it now that there's like a bit more of like, it's an impersonal, it's easier for you to ignore it. I don't
Yes,
know the
that's right.
answer. I'm not sure what is preferred, right? Because I think like to a certain degree, relationships are more superficial now, right? As
Yep.
opposed to maybe 10, 15 years ago, where
Oh,
like
yeah.
you were friends with your customers. Not that
Yeah.
I'm not now. I mean, I still am, but it's different. It's not quite the same. There's not as much FaceTime. Certainly remote work has changed business in general. Like you can be anywhere. Whereas if you were in media 15 years ago, you had to be in New York, Chicago, LA,
Yeah,
potentially
I was just
Boston or
talking about
Atlanta,
this.
but like really like, unless you were a really big company, you didn't have like dedicated sales coverage in those like secondary and tertiary markets. I mean, when we worked together, I flew to Chicago like once a month and to cover
Yep.
Chicago from New York. So,
Yep.
um, I forgot what the question was, but that's to say, like, is it more personal? Is it less personal? Do I prefer it? I think it's easier to reach out to a lot of people. It's potentially easier, more, it's easier now than it ever has been to find like who the right person should be
Right.
with tools like LinkedIn, and any sort of like ad monitoring tool that you can now do online, which they, because they could scrape everything and you could just sort of see who's running where. But I also think that again, making it so easy, like it sort of lowers the bar. And I used to think like a big part of the challenge was finding the right person and knowing who that person was, and that's a part of the game. So, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, I think that is too. But I also think to your point, technology has now made it a situation where for both you and I, by the way, listeners, we both work in the newsletter space together. So, Jeff, obviously, I told you a little bit about Media Intercept. Obviously, you know about me. I own a single company that does the same thing. But while we sort of approach our business differently, we are in the newsletter space. But I often think about how, the idea is that if I could count how many connections I have from all these years of people that literally I probably have their phone number and I can text them anytime I want. I mean, it's pretty sad, Jeff. It's probably like less than a dozen. I mean, I'm talking about clients like that I would feel
yeah,
comfortable enough to be like, hey, can we get this turned around pretty quickly, whatever the case is. But I think that's part of the problem. So it makes it much harder to have meaningful relationships. There's also another element of that too. It's that the kind of business that we're in, what I offer. I think yours might be a bit more complex. Mine, you don't really need to be in front of people to sort of explain what I have. So it's
mm,
not like when I used to work for giant companies and we had these big giant programs that we were selling. So it makes it easier to sort of convey to them what you do in a quick email or a quick phone call. So that makes it harder. But I think one of the biggest challenges for us personally, I think you'd probably agree, is that you were saying earlier the bar set so much lower, right? So I have a business that has 2 million subscribers, but a business that reaches the same audience that has 10,000 subscribers, they have the same access to decision makers that I have because of what technology's done, and that makes it harder, right? I don't know. Maybe I don't know how that's impacted buyers at all. Meaning, like, has it made it harder for them, or is it easier for them to manage that? I don't know, but I think that's part of the problem too. That when you and I used to fly to Chicago or fly to LA or fly to New York, right? You were a big enough company. You did that. You wouldn't be a small mom and pop shop and sort of travel around the country to get face-to-face meetings. So I think that's hard too.
yeah. I mean, I think that there's obviously like again, so yes, we were big enough to do that, but not big enough to have someone actually in market, right? So I think
Yeah.
that's different, but. Yeah, I mean, I think what we do, for you certainly you've gotten enough scale where at this point you can kind of justify. And there's my
Well, this
cat.
is like a thing on my podcast. So I just had a podcast with Noelle Spagna from Motley Fool, and the same thing happened. Her cat came right up on her lap.
Yeah,
What's the name of
yeah.
your cat? Let's not get on to, but what's the name of your cat?
Mac is the name of my
Oh,
cat, and we talked
uh,
about this a little bit before the show that I'm remodeling a house. So I'm living in a
Yeah.
a temporary apartment that's a little bit smaller than what I'm used to, so everyone's on top of each other. But
Yeah.
yeah, to get back to the point, like you're big enough now where you can, particularly in the men's lifestyle space, like you've got a reason to have a seat at any table for anyone who's targeting men, right?
Yeah.
Specifically, and your value proposition is very specific, which I almost think helps, right? As opposed to what we do, and we're more of an aggregator. So we'll work with like 1,000 different newsletters. So we're more of a generalist. But part of our pitch would be to those buyers, like, look, you don't have time to talk to 1,000 different people.
That's
So you
right.
can do it through me. And
Yeah.
oftentimes what will happen is they'll get outreach and they'll just sort of kick it over to us.
Yeah.
We have clients that have been clients now for years, month over month, and we've sort of become like their agency of record to a certain degree. And so they'll just sort of say, "Hey, if you want to work with us, talk to Jeff's team at Media Intercept," and that saves them time.
That's great for you too. I didn't even think of
Mhm.
that. That makes a lot of sense that you would be that sort of person. So now you're almost like a gatekeeper in a way for these newsletters
I
that are trying to reach out to them.
it's a gatekeeper. I think like one of the things I've learned over the years. I think we've both learned this. Like I don't. I think that people think budget is the biggest barrier to closing a deal, and I
Hmm.
often will say that that's not really, I think, the case, especially when you're talking with larger brands or larger just enterprise customers. I think like time as a resource, is the
Yeah.
biggest barrier. So if you can go to somebody and say, look, I know you can afford this from a fiscal perspective, but you can't afford to, like, you'd rather not hire a whole nother employee to manage this, or like even
Right.
deal with like managing that person. It just becomes a time issue. So if they can just sort of farm that out to somebody who has expertise in the space while still hitting their goals, they're going to do that 10 times out of 10. And so, that's a part of what we do. And I think, yeah, it's a big part of our pitch. I mean, we're probably not as efficient as if an advertiser went to you and bought directly, but they're paying for convenience, and I think that is a good selling point. And again, it sort of helps us stand out to a buyer that's getting 1,000 emails a day from people who are trying to get their attention.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you serve as a great sort of way for them to streamline because there are so many newsletters right now. And to your point, some newsletters are big enough to have a seat at the table. There's not many, but there's a ton that don't. And so that's where you come in and you can become a really good resource for them. It's really smart. I hadn't thought about it that way. Let's pivot for a sec. So I think about this a lot. So how many sellers do you have now?
Well, we're up to 4,
Okay.
and I think the goal is by the end of the year to be at 8. So
That's awesome.
yeah,
I only have two. I have two good ones. So not to say I only have two. Got to be
you count
careful about that.
yourself in the 2.
No, I don't. Not in this not in this question, because I'm asking the question to you because the question to you is what you and I would do in this case, which is like, how do you think about training and or motivating your sellers in the age of remote work and the fact that they're not in
Mhm.
front of you anymore? Like, how do you
Yeah.
do you think about that? I think about it a lot, and it's definitely different.
Yeah, no, so there's different skills, right? I think, I think back to when I was managing like a pretty large sales team, but primarily focused on, large media agency business. And, a lot of you would source a lot of potential salespeople out of agencies, right? They had worked at an agency, so they understand the ins and outs of that business. And, there's a natural transition. Obviously the rewards can be greater on the sales side. So that's a big part of it.
Yep.
And oftentimes you would interview somebody and they might be, not junior, but, late 20s, probably have 5 or 6 years of experience. They're ready to jump into sales. And like, you just know inherently, like what they think of the job is not actually the job. Right. So they're
Yeah.
thinking,
Yeah.
I've sat in 1,000 pitches. I can do it better than what I've seen. Right. And I would sort of not trick them, but this is a way of me letting them know what the job is to make sure that they're on board for it, and also see if like they understand, that I think they'll be capable of doing it. So I would say it's a question I had in every interview, and I would still use it today, right? Especially if they were a buyer, I would say, okay, you were account director at Verizon. That's a big job. A lot of people want your dollars. Like, how many emails did you get last week by sellers trying to get in front of you?
Hmm.
And like not understanding the point of the exercise, they would think like, I want to make myself look important, right? So they would say,
Yeah.
oh, like 500.
Yeah.
And I would say, okay, well, how many did you respond to? they're
Yeah.
like, oh, like two.
Oof.
And so then the next question is like, how are you, if I hire you, going to be one of the two? Like
Yeah.
what?
That's a great question.
And you would just see the blood like drain out of their face when like understood
Yeah.
now like what the job actually was, which is
Yeah.
not, and listen, we can talk about training people to pitch and training people really to ask the right questions. And that's to me the biggest component of it. Um, but I think like getting in the door, and that's kind of what we were talking about at the beginning is the biggest challenge, and just sort of understanding prospecting and messaging, and how do I ultimately pique someone's attention enough where they're going to want to give me more of their time, right? It comes back down to
That's right.
time. And so I
Yep.
think that's what I think about first and foremost. And then, as I get into training, I think that like when you're talking about salespeople, and this can be sellers that are new, right? Certainly that's where you see it more often, but I've had to retrain some sellers that have experience. In terms of them not doing proper discovery. And I don't mean before the meeting. I mean, of course, you want to go in with some idea of what the client's problem might be, but within the
Yeah.
meeting, like just basically like we're not going to pitch anything until we get as much information from them as possible, because you're more
I'd
likely to
often wonder if that's even like a common thing. I think your approach is right. I don't necessarily think that all sellers do that. I think they just walk in blindly. I think a lot do.
walk in blindly. Like
Yeah.
I even had I'm going to send you my deck beforehand. Like, okay, well, first of all, fine. If you think that saves time, perhaps, but you're potentially sending information that like isn't relevant to the client. But you might have been able to come up with something else, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest lesson is like it's easier to sell something, of course, when you have all the information, but like the hardest thing to do is to unsell something, to like
Yeah.
say something that's wrong, and then to kind of figure out a way to fix it. Like that's difficult. So if you jump right in and pitch, and something you say is counter to what the buyer is looking for or needs, it's very hard to recover from that.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Do you feel like, okay, so you were talking about training, like I don't train my sellers, right? They're senior people, but like I obviously guide them, right? And have them a lot of the times what I do is help them think about things that we have that can be relevant for a potential brand or any kind of information they can leverage. But I sort of hand that to them, assuming that they are able to effectively use it. And I think they do, maybe because I'm fortunate enough with the two sellers I have, they're very good,
Mm-hmm.
relatively speaking. But do you actually train sellers, or you bring in sellers in? I understand you ask a lot of good questions, you make them think, but are you actually like, just like when we started in sales, I was trained. I went to like, they sent me to Dale Carnegie school class in New York. I literally had to go to class like once a week, 3 hours a night for like 10 weeks when I was at Ladies Home Journal, and learn the Dale Carnegie sales school method, which is, like, can you imagine that today? It's crazy.
I mean, I worked at a large company, and there was a lot of sales training, right? It was called a
Yeah.
company called Decker that we used to do presentation training with, and then there were other specialists. I think Doug Weaver's one. You probably know Doug Weaver, and
Yeah.
a few guys that just sort of talk about. And I think it's helpful, right? Because I think that when you're a junior, you sort of you can look at sales, or at least I did. It's like there's some puzzle you're trying to solve, and like how do I get from here to here? And it can be a mystery, right? Until you have some success and you sort of understand, that ultimately the person on the other side is a person. Like there's motivation there, one way or
Yeah.
the other, and there's fear, right? So like I think understanding those things going into it, again, having empathy for what the other person's trying to achieve or like not try to have happen, right? I don't want to be fired is probably a big motivator of a buyer, right? So,
Yep. Yep.
how do you make that person look good or not look bad? I mean, those are like sort of the base visceral components of it. But yes, I do train. I think the first thing I do is I'll just join a seller on a call,
Oh,
just
that's
to kind
great.
of hear, and and it's usually just like, and I'll still do it. I'll drop in randomly. They don't know when, because I'm invited. I'm required to be invited to every sales meeting. Just it helps me to
Good Lord,
avoid.
man. My sellers would, I think, shit themselves if I did that. But I think it's great.
I mean, they understand that I'm there. Like, first of all, they want me there, right? They know that I'm hopefully
Yeah.
going to add value. I'm not there to steal their
Right.
thunder. Certainly not at this point. Maybe earlier in my career, I might have might have been a little chatty, but I think that it helps me to. It's always helpful to have someone observe you, and I would say that's true now, right? I talk to my kids about that with sports because kids are like, if I coach them, they don't want to hear it from dad. But I tell my son, I'm not criticizing you. The difference is like I can watch what you're doing while which is easy for me to see like how your body's moving. It's very hard when you're the one doing it to have enough like self-awareness to sort of see where you're maybe making mistakes. And
Oh yeah, 100%.
So it's not that they're making mistakes necessarily, but I can kind of sit there and see how the call goes, and then maybe have a post-mortem on it, and discuss like, hey, like if we would have asked this, maybe we would have gotten this information, and perhaps things would have gone a little bit differently. But I think like a lot of my sellers have observed me in meetings enough to see the way that I do it. Where I think that we all have strengths and weaknesses. Like certainly being organized is not my strength. And, but there are some sellers that are really effective because they're so organized. So everyone's got a different ability.
Yep.
I think I'm probably good in the room, right? I'm good at reading people and knowing what to say and knowing the right questions to ask. And I think they've sort of seen the result of that, right? Like, so they see, okay, if I ask these questions, I start to get these answers. And then sales calls become almost like decision tree conversations.
Yeah.
And it becomes very easy, right? You're like, okay, if they say this, then I know to do this.
Yep.
And you can start to see it, like you can actually see it in real time working, where a buyer will say something and it's almost like the seller wants to jump through the computer screen.
Yeah.
It's like, you said it, I've got you, I know now exactly what to do to close this deal.
Yeah.
But that comes from, experience and being in a lot of conversations. But yeah, I think having them observe me, I think sort of talking about what's happened in calls, like that's all really important. And then another thing that I do, like, so we hold sales meetings once a week.
That's great.
And yes, like we can have people recap certainly their business, and it's good to have like a high level view, but that's nothing that I can't get by looking at a CRM or through a one-on-one. So I do have a continuing education component of that meeting every week.
Oh, I love that. That's great.
And it's a different seller, right? So the one who's really good at like Apollo and understanding like how to use that for sequencing, like she'll sort of have maybe a 15-minute session learning anything new, or what headlines are we using and why, right? In the emails, and like what's effective there. Versus another one who's really good at like understanding how to navigate the affiliate platforms to find, perhaps advertisers that are hitting their head on the ceiling of an affiliate that want to move into, now we're gonna get a little bit technical, but like CPC, CPM, flat rate.
Yeah.
And he's really good at that. So talking about, hey, you can use this as a tool. And it's something that I wouldn't know, but he's really good at it and shares it with the rest of the team. So I think, I train certainly, and I know this is a long answer to your question. But then I try to have the sellers, the things that I know they're good at, I want them to share with the rest.
Yeah, no, it's a very good answer. It's very similar. Again, don't want to age ourselves, but like back when I worked at People Magazine and I worked every day in New York, and we did the same thing. There were like 50 of us in a room, and you all had times during one of those weeks where you had to present kind of your expertise or findings or things that could help others. I think that's really smart. I mean, it's great. Good for you. How about, I don't want you to give away your secret sauce for your company, but like, what are some of the things that you either teach them or think about in this day and age that can help you break through all of the communication coming at these decision makers or buyers, right? Because it's kind of one form. And I often wonder, do you have any sort of advice for other sellers on things to think about that can help them break through? Again, let's not give away the secret sauce, Jeff, for your company.
No secret sauce. I mean, I can be general, and I think that this is a general tip. Like it gets back to, again, putting yourself in the shoes of the person that you're reaching out to. Like if you were them, what would compel you to respond? Because I got to tell you, I'll get in my position, and I'm sure you get it too, right? Like 100 emails a day from whatever company trying to sell me, whether it's, BDR, right? Or SDR. Like how many of those do you get? Right. And I almost want to respond to all of them and be like, if you think if you can't get me to answer you, what makes you think I'm going to hire you to do outreach on behalf of my company. I mean, it's
Right.
crazy.
Right. It would be fun.
But
I
if you
thought
can,
about, I've also thought separately. I get so many of these emails, and I know you do too. People that email us for services that are just completely irrelevant to what we do. And I would love to respond to some of them and just say, okay, like, how are you going to help me, and make them answer it. I bet they don't even know who I am, but that's
well,
simple
I
too.
can tell you a more specific. I mean, yes, you're not even going to come. You're not going to waste your time. But I will
No.
tell you where I do waste my time sometimes because I'm so like because so if I go to a conference,
Yeah.
we were just at Affiliate Summit West, right? And you have the opportunity within the app to put a very specific profile. Here's what I do. Here's what I'm looking for,
Yeah.
right? And if you're a good salesperson, you will use that, right? You'll look for, okay, this person's looking for this. I have that,
Yeah.
right? So I'm going to address that specific request within my outreach, and hopefully that garners a response and gets me a meeting. But like,
Yeah.
I'll have people reach out with things. I'm like, did you take the time? You obviously didn't take the time to read what I do. So now you're
Right.
wasting everyone's time,
Yeah.
right? And
That's
that's a
true.
situation where it's not mass outreach. I mean, if there's a few thousand attendees, it's not like you're not talking about the whole world, right?
Yeah.
So I get it. They probably have meeting quotas they have to hit, and they reach a point where they're like just spray and pray, and but I think some general tips like what motivates buyers, right? Specifically in what we do, which is media. So like one thing, I want to know what my competitors are doing, right?
Yeah.
That's one way. So if you are calling on a certain category where you've had maybe some success as a company, you can use that. You could say, hey, you sell cars. We're working with Porsche. That's a
Yeah.
luxury car brand. So if you're a
That's right.
BMW, Mercedes, whoever else, Tesla, like you should be aware of what your competitor is doing, and I can tell you more about it. And that's going to be interesting enough to a lot of buyers, even if it's not right for them to just, hey, I'm curious, right?
No,
Uh,
100%. Yeah.
in the same token, you can sort of say, I know you've done something similar to this, and you continue to do it, and I offer like some permutation of that. So you're just not aware of me. Let me make you aware of what I do because I probably fit with what you already do. So that just understanding sort of what that prospect is already doing and potentially how you can help.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
can you help that person do their job
Yeah.
better
Yeah.
is ultimately what's going to get you in the door.
Yeah, I always think about it as it's like narrowing the lane of focus for them, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you make it the more relevant you make it for them, or the more you connect the dots, the better you have a chance to
Sure.
to get a response. Right? It's the same thing. Yeah, that's really smart, and I think it's really surprising. A lot of that. That's sort of the next question, which is how does technology help you or gain advantage? Like I'll give my own story. We, just to be candid, right? I struggle with the concept of sequencing because I don't think it's really effective.
Mm.
That doesn't maybe that means that I don't do it well enough, but generally the sequencing that we've tried over the years has not really generated much success at all. But and I also feel like I worry that sequencing has us basically sort of mass communicating to a lot of people, and then perhaps it may hurt us in the long run. I'm not sure. I mean, we're a smaller company, but that's just one example. But do you feel that these technologies, such as Apollo and others, or whatever the case may be, are helping you in your efforts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like if you leave it up to just like automation entirely, like you're gonna fail, right? You're
Yep.
gonna it's just gonna be like exactly what we're talking about, just a bunch of spam going out there,
Right.
probably not to the right people, probably not with the right messaging, impersonal. Um, and I don't have my none of my sellers do that. We talk about, yes, use the tools to make you more efficient, but ultimately every message that goes out has some level of personalization. Like there's something very relevant and specific to a prospect. Now
Yeah.
you can create multiple templates where you can sort of fill
Yeah.
in,
Yeah.
the blanks and say, okay, like, and then sequence it out because I mean, so some of it is also timeliness. I mean, obviously, like, we prospect the market pretty aggressively, and we do that by just sort of seeing what everyone's doing.
Yeah.
So if you like monitor a publication, like let's say I want to monitor elevator, right?
Yep.
Like
Hmm.
I subscribe to all your newsletters,
Thank you.
not to compete with you, but like to see
No,
what
I
just
know.
who's advertising, right?
Yeah.
And
Right. Sure.
if I go after a brand and I see that, oh, I saw you in elevator yesterday, right? So I know you're in market, right?
Yeah.
You're not
Yep.
buying from me. Why not? And maybe it's because
Yeah.
you didn't know. You didn't, And I'll always tell them, hey, like you should maintain that personal relationship with with Sean and his team, but you can buy more if that's successful for you. That's great, and let me help you buy more, right?
Yep. Right.
And I think you can't do that. Like, there's not to say that it'll never happen. There's probably going to be some point in time where like that can be automated somehow.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm sure. If
but
not already, and
but
we
I
just
think
don't know. I don't even know.
could be. I mean, it could be. But I think to a certain degree, like it just tells the first thing it tells the buyer is like, oh, you're paying attention to my business.
Yep.
Like you're actually like looking at what I do, seeing where I advertise, like understanding to a certain degree like what I'm trying to accomplish by doing that.
That's right.
And so taking notice, like I know that if I have a conversation with you, it's not going to be a total waste of my time because you've already taken the time to do at least a basic amount of research.
Yep.
So I think, but the tools certainly help you to do more of it. I think that's maybe part of it. And then probably do a better job monitoring what you're doing. So you can kind of look back and say, okay, like I've reached out to this person 5 times. They're not answering. It could be because they're not the right person. It could be because like they don't care or whatever, but like it's time to move on to somebody else within that organization, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I will 100% agree with you there. The idea to sort of track and monitor the people that you're reaching out to, the technology is great, right? I use it all the time in the same way that my sellers do and your sellers do, where you're able to go back and really kind of do a history check on all of these and find out, just like you said, who's engaged with it, who's opened, who's maybe even
Yeah.
responded, and sort of narrow the field. So yeah, that's
Although I
totally
would
true.
I would ask you that I have 2 questions for you now
Cool.
on that. So one, I don't find like, do you find the opened metric now to be of any value?
I only find it to be a value in that it allows me to at least, unless it's wrong, know that they've engaged in some way. So, I mean, I'm first of all going with the same approach that you do, right? In the hopes that if I am reaching out to them, I am relevant, or there's something about them that makes it a good prospect. It's not just a total
Mm,
blind prospect. So the fact that it's a good prospect and someone that we know is a good fit for us, or they've run somewhere else, or they're in market, then if they respond, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but the sense is that at least I know there's been some engagement. So then I can try to tailor that message even more and see if I can get a response. Right?
well, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why I ask though,
Yeah.
because like think about the way that you might read email like on your phone.
Yeah.
Like you just like click something and then I'll just like delete, delete, delete. But like if it opens,
Yeah.
it's open even though like I'm not paying any attention to it.
Yeah.
And I guess that's why I keep getting like emails from the same person over and over again because they see me like opening it, so they think
Uh,
like, oh, like one of these days. Anyway,
yeah. Yeah. No, that's right. I also am someone that thinks that this is my persuasive writing hat from teaching this a few years ago. I
yeah,
mean, it's probably a bit extreme, but I generally feel like if I can't get their attention with the first line that I write, then it's over. You know what I mean? So
probably, yeah, they're not
that
gonna.
right. So that should be fine for a phone and desktop. But if I don't have something meaningful enough to stay within the first, I don't know, 8 to 10 words, like I've got no shot. Right. So I'm
Even the
very
subject
careful
line.
about that. Yeah, the subject line, I think. I had some stat back when I taught that talked about how there's this tremendous correlation between effectiveness of subject line and open. Right. So if you don't have a good subject line, people aren't opening. And
Yeah.
there's some crazy stat that says that basically people will spend less than 3.4 seconds on an email, which sounds about right. That might even be too much, right?
Mm.
Yeah, I know. I see you shaking your head. It might be too much, but I think that's true too. So I think we have very little time and attention to try to get them. This is with prospects, right? Now, people you have a relationship with. So,
So my
but yeah,
second
I
question.
mean, well, yeah. So just let me sort of sum that up.
Yeah.
I think to answer your question, I do use it that way. I can't say entirely that, like you said, either they've really read it and thought, oh, I'd like to work with them, or like you said, they were on their phone, they clicked it. I don't know.
Right. We don't know. Second
Yeah.
question. This is one that I've always sort of struggled with. Right. Let's say you want to work with a brand or any customer. Forget it. We could take it out of advertising to make it general, but in our case, it's a brand, right? And you look and you go on LinkedIn or wherever you're going to go to just sort of see like who the right person is. And you see like 4 different people with potential, like with titles that could potentially be relevant.
Yeah.
Do you start with the one that's most relevant, try to get to them, it doesn't work, and then you go to the next, or do you reach out to all of them at once?
Great question. Usually the one that I think is most relevant, and then I try the next one. I
Right.
will, sadly, I will tell you if there's a brand that I really, really have been trying to get forever, like we all have, like, God damn, there's this one brand, like, why won't they run with us? I probably reach out to maybe as many as I can, hoping just from simply from a numbers game that maybe one of them responds. And by the way, it hasn't worked yet. I can tell you the five brands that, I just wish they would run with us and they haven't in 2 years. And I've tried. And funny enough, one of them, shit, I'll tell you, one of them is Yeti, right? I just don't understand why Yeti doesn't run with us. Of course, we all have brands like that, right? And there's probably a very good reason as to why they don't. But I do know that the one guy that I send messages to, I see that he opens like 5, 6 times every time. So it drives me crazy, right? So either, like you said, he's just ripping through it and not even reading it, or he's just teasing me thinking like, oh, I'm getting so close. But clearly I haven't, because it's been like 2 years where I think this guy's opened, if I'm right, I think he's opened an email for me maybe 50 times. And I've
Mm.
tried all kinds of different things, right? I've tried mocking up ads. I've tried to be really funny. I've tried to sort of like, I've tried all kinds of angles. But, and that's an example too, Jeff. Oh, wait, did you ask your second question? I don't want to get off
That
on a
was
tangent.
my second question was like the
Oh, yeah, yeah, the one versus
yeah.
all of them. So here's my question back to you. How far would you go? One of the things I've considered, I tried a little bit. I haven't said a lot, but like if there's a contact or someone that I really, really think is really relevant and, just a head scratcher that I can't get them to run. And like we all know, there's could be 1,000 reasons. I have tried on a few occasions because you can get their phone number and tried to text them. Very rarely. It hasn't worked yet, but like how far would you go?
I
It's also funny too. Let me explain. One of the most effective things we do as a company, and maybe you do this too, and it's what gets me the most response is every year I pick the 25 best prospects or clients and I send them a gift. Like we send them something every year. Send them something really good. Costs a lot of money, costs a lot of effort, but obviously I get responses immediately from every one of them, and it works great. So should I spend more time sending shit to people's offices or sending to their homes? That's not really effective, but so
I
to wrap
would
it up, how far would you go, or how far do you go beyond just an email to try to get somebody's attention?
yeah, I mean I would not text them. Not because
Okay,
it's just everyone's got their thing. Like that to me would make me uncomfortable if I got
yeah, you
that.
might be right. I think it would
So
make me
like
uncomfortable. So,
right.
but I
So
don't
then
know.
like
I don't know.
then I'm not going to do that to somebody else. But um I mean, there's all sorts of tactics, right? Here's one. Like you probably remember we used to do this when we worked when we worked together. The sales manager at the time, um,
Yeah,
it was a good idea, and I had used it subsequent to this. Had this idea. We were selling video, and it was like, okay, we're going to send out like a sizzle reel of like our
yeah,
best, and you have to answer like 2 or 3 questions within that. But if you do, you're entered into a contest to win. I think at the time we were giving out like iPads when iPads were new, and and the response rate would be fantastic, right?
yeah,
You would
yeah,
get like 100 different responses, and these are from people that typically don't answer.
yeah. That's right.
And then, of course, like years later, we can say this now, but we would rig it
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that
Of course. Yeah.
then the winner would be somebody that like you really wanted to meet with, and like you
No
couldn't get a
way.
meeting.
You did that, Jeff? I can't believe you did that.
What? Of course, I did that
Of course, I did it too. Right.
because he would do that. This person would say, "All right, who do you want to win? Who do we need to
Yeah.
get in front of?" And,
Right.
basically, so in the same token of like sending out a gift, you're basically saying, "Okay, I'm going to spend $500
Yeah.
to meet with this person because like the potential." And we're talking about like the Procter and Gambles of the world, where like there's just billions of dollars that are there, right?
Hey,
So
here. Wait, real quick. Here's a pivot on that idea. Great
mm,
idea. I totally agree with you. Would it be better to give that one client the big gift that we really want to get to, or would it be better to give 25 clients like I don't know $5 to $10 gift cards, and maybe that would be enough. I don't know.
but is a $5 to $10 gift card going to motivate somebody to
Yeah, I don't
respond?
know. You're right. Yeah, right.
So,
I'm not
but you
sure.
could do like $100 gift card. I mean, you could do instead of one 500, you could do, and we used to do all sorts of things.
Yeah,
But I mean, I did it a couple of jobs later, and I got, I think 500 responses, which was
yeah,
like a crazy. When we're talking about like in the agency world, I mean, it kept our pipeline full for the next 6 months.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that for a while. I think we're going to do that here.
Yeah, you just told me. I was like, "Shit, Jeff, that's a pretty good idea. Maybe we have to
It
do
is a
that
good
sometime."
idea. It is a good
It is
idea.
a good
Listen,
idea.
it worked then. We'll see if it works now.
Yeah,
So to get back, I wouldn't text somebody, but like I could, there have been times where like I'll arrange. I think like again, people don't necessarily care about you and like what you need, but you could say like, okay, Yeti isn't Yeti in Austin, Texas. Like you could be like,
yeah,
hey, I have a trip. I'm going to be in town anyway.
yeah.
Like figure
Yep.
out like some way to like work that into. I know there's a newsletter conference there right now. Actually, we have a BD person going, but
Did you have somebody go to that? Oh,
yeah,
we can talk
he's
about that later. Okay.
about
Yeah,
like,
that's fine.
but yeah, I mean, like I used to use that. Like if I was planning a trip to Chicago, I'd be like, I'm going to be in town for these 3 days. Like I'd love to take you to lunch or do something that at least like there's something in it for them, right? And maybe that's it, right? Maybe if like you really want to talk to Yeti, like first of all, Austin's a fun place, and you could probably find other reasons to be there from a business perspective and justify the trip. I mean, we do it now. We do it now in New York. I'm not based in New York anymore. I was, but I'm not there anymore. But I'll plan a trip at least once a quarter
Yeah,
to one, get in front of current clients. I think FaceTime is really important, especially if you're working in a competitive space and people have options. They're going to choose to work with people they like. And if I spend
100%.
$500 or $1,000 taking someone to dinner, but they're spending $100,000 with me a month, that's like a
That's right.
no
That's
brainer
right.
ROI there.
That's right. That's right.
But I'll then use that to say, hey, I'm going to be in town, and I think personally, like nobody meets with anybody anymore.
No,
Everything's like this, right? And I think like the ability to walk into somebody's office and spend time, first of all, it's more effective, but I think that people are open to that, especially if you can do something fun or whatever, if they have an interest. So yeah, I mean that's I think that's one tactic I would use. I do think gifting, I think that's fine. Like, hey, like we haven't gotten in touch. Like maybe it's because you're tired. Like here's a $10 Starbucks gift card, like something funny, kind of,
yep. No, it's a great idea. Yeah, yeah. I think these are smart things that just sort of help us sort of stand up. I love your idea of getting into market because I do think that allows you to. I think two things. It is a different message for those people. They're not getting a lot of people coming into market anymore, and I think because at least I would hope, probably so few sellers come into market that have hopefully the idea of them meeting with somebody that's relevant would be more appealing versus having tons of sellers in the market and trying to fight off many, many appointments. I do know that I think I told you the other day, sorry, listeners, about this idea of virtual presentations that was given to me by an agency because they said that because people aren't in the office as much, that when they are there, they tend to not want to meet because they're there more to sort of engage with coworkers and see their
Mhm.
bosses and do the things they don't normally do. But I think if you made the effort to go into a market, it's not something that's very common. And if you're relevant, I think they could make the time. And to your point, it certainly is a good message to send them and something that stands out from, the basic message that we all send most of the time, which is, hey, run some business with me. So I think
But
that's
I
really
think
smart.
I think that's changing though. I think you're going to see more and more people going back to the office. I mean, that's already a thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And certainly, we take advantage of conferences. I mean,
Yeah.
I have my team going to a lot of them this year. We just talked about one, but I'm going to try to get myself to at least like 6 or 7 this year.
That's great.
I mean, look, if you look at it there's two costs to it, right? So one is the actual cost, and that's easily like you close one deal at any of these things, and that pays for you to go, no question.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then there is the time, right? Like the time that I'm spending there, while I'm running a company, like is that the best use of my time? And sometimes yes, and sometimes no. And I think we used to have everyone go to certain events and we would use it sort of as an offsite because we're a totally remote company. But I think now we're trying to do more, and by doing but in doing more, you have to sacrifice. So not everyone's going to go to everything, and it's like I have one person going to this event in Austin this week, but like I'm not going, and my co-founder's not going, and
Right. Right.
But I do
Yep.
think like that I would be, and my advice to you, I mean, we're going to go to a lot of conferences, and I think like especially the ones that like foster networking, like have specifically, okay, here's an app. The whole intention is for you to connect with other people.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
We went to a conference in Vegas, a month and a half ago, and I mean, we had as a team over 100 meetings. So
Yeah, I think you're right. I do. I really think you're right. I think my it's not a reluctance, but I think I need to do it and recognize that, to your point, even if I'm at a conference that, like you, maybe is not specific for my industry or some variation of my industry, right? Whether it's affiliate or whatever the case is, I still can have a lot of great conversations there, and I think that that's more. And I will say that I just went to Austin, Texas. Funny enough, I didn't go around this conference because I didn't think this conference would have anybody there I needed to see, but I did go and see two really key clients. And yes, that helped tremendously as
totally.
we continue. I didn't get to see Yeti, but I think that's really good advice too. Yeah, that's great. It's been 45 minutes and we have shared a ton of great tips for
Yeah.
people. Anything else you feel like you want to cover? Like, I feel like we hit a lot. I knew we would, and I feel like there's a lot of great stuff for people to chew on from this.
Yeah. I mean, I think like the takeaway, if we're talking about like, we talked a lot about how things have changed and, is the technology of sales and all that stuff. I think like talking about one thing that hasn't changed, and I touched on this a little bit, is again, like ultimately you're selling to another person, right? And
Yeah.
that person's motivations. And, that's really the most important thing to understand is like you need to get a clear grasp on what's going to move that person to make a decision in your favor. Right. And,
Yep.
and it's
Yep.
not like, and so it's one of the things that I'll often see, and I learned this, or someone taught me this at some point. Like if someone sends an outreach and says like, well, I'd love to do this. I'm like, well, I don't care what you'd love to do. If you're
Yeah.
selling to
Right.
me, what does it
Right.
matter to me what you want?
Yeah.
You're here to figure out what I want and need. And hopefully you have something that I want and need. Right.
Yeah, and ultimately help me, right? Help me look better. Help me perform my job better. Help me be help me look good. That's right.
So I think too many sellers still like look at that. I mean, I've seen, God, over the years, some of the stuff you see, you can tell so many stories of just bad salespeople that just
Yeah.
don't understand. I mean, we talked about like that Laughing Cow deal. That was a deal that we spearheaded, but we worked with like a big media company as partners on it, and their seller like literally only had to know, I think, two pieces of information. That was like her entire role in that hour-long pitch meeting in front of like 30 executives.
Yeah.
And she got up there with note cards. And it's like you want to crawl under the table. It's like have no pride as a professional. You don't even know
Right.
basic information about your own product.
Yeah, that's right.
But I've seen that. I've seen salespeople that will like interrupt the buyer when they're giving you information.
Ugh.
And you're
Yeah,
just
all the
like,
time.
I had to finally go to a salespeople like person. I said, and she was good in general, but she used to do it. And it was excitement or whatever. I'm just like, if I ever see you do that again, like I'm going to have to fire you. Like I cannot
Right.
have you doing that.
No, it's terrible.
It's crazy. Or like I had a guy, he sat down, the way he opened the meeting is like, so you have any budget for me in Q3? Like that.
Oh
I'm like,
God.
so, I mean, I guess like, okay, there's an idea of being direct. Like, let's not waste time. But it's
No.
so like such a transactional, one-sided, like, what can you do for me way?
Yeah, I mean, you said something earlier about having empathy, and that's a big part of being a seller. Talk about having a total lack of empathy by starting your meeting saying, what money do you have for me?
Right. Right.
That's
Yeah.
stupid.
I mean,
Right.
and he wasn't even being like, you could say like, oh, you could say that as like a joke kind of
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
kind of break the ice. But like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, so I think all those things, ultimately, and being conversational and being friendly and, having, I sort of say like, I have, one of my superpowers is that I can sort of have at least a superficial conversation about just about anything.
Right. Sure.
And so if you walk into a meeting and someone went to college somewhere or had a job at some place, like you find something to sort of make a personal connection.
Yep.
And to sort of take some of the air out of the room and like, okay,
Take
now
the
we
edge
can
off.
get started and have a friendly conversation. And ultimately, it's about building trust and comfort, and people, want to believe what you say. And obviously, that's important. But yeah, I think, looking at the other person across the room and sort of getting a sense of what their fears are and what they need and what can make their lives easier, 9 times out of 10, that'll get you where you have to go.
Oh yeah, empathy, being relatable. Yeah, right. Making it, like you said, presenting clearly to them that you are an asset for them. It's not about you, it's about them, and how do you make them look better. Like those are all really, really smart things. Yeah. So it's great. All right, man, I'm going to let you
Yeah.
go. You can get back to your things, get back to you doing your work. I thought this was great. I think we touched on a lot of really good stuff today, which I knew we would. So it was a ton of fun. And I will, I'll catch up with you soon. This was really fun.
And I'm going to have my team reach out to Yeti. And
go ahead.
If you can't get them, maybe we'll place them with you guys, and then it'll sort of be like at
this point, Jeff, I give you permission. Go get me Yeti.
But now you got to tell me the other 4. What are the other 4 brands so I can go after all of them? That way, at least I have a chance. We can talk about it.
Ones. Well, no. We can talk about it offline. I'll tell you offline for sure. And something tells me you're probably either trying to work with them or you haven't yet. But what you have for them should make a lot of sense. And I think it's what I don't have that makes it harder for me. So we'll talk about those. I mean, as soon as we're done here, we'll talk about those brands.
I appreciate you having me, Sean. This is great.
I do too. This was great, Jeff. I knew you'd be great. All right, buddy. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. Special shout out to Elijah who helped me put it together. I hope you liked it. If you have any comments or questions, I'd love to hear from you. You can leave a comment in the section below, or you can reach out to me directly. And I hope you'll make it to the next one.